Hello, future people who are watching this. All right. Welcome, everyone. So for those of you who have been part of previous sessions, I thought that we would open, since tonight is a little valedictory, with a sense of what has stuck, what is salient from 4 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. There's a little bit of a teacup to a fire hose thing going when there's so much rich Torah and so few sessions to discuss them. So it may be hard to grasp any one piece, but if there's something that lodged, something that you've been thinking about, maybe from the book, a practice that you have already undertaken that has worked, just a few people to give some voice for a little background and context. How are we living this? Anyone? Peter.
I think that the notion that God as big person is our default metaphor, and it doesn't work. And so we reject this metaphor, and some people reject God because they view that not as a metaphor, but as God. And I think that she comes to that at the end, that in the absence of working to find better metaphors, the big person metaphor, the Sistine Chapel one, is the one that we default to, and we're dubious about it, which with good reason. And probably what the big point is that the great scholars of Jewish interpretation didn't have the big person metaphor in mind. We kind of got stuck with it.
Nice. Yes. Beautiful. That goes with Maimonides, who is working really hard in the 12th century to say, people, God doesn't actually have an arm, right? The outstretched arm that took us out of Egypt is a metaphor. God does not have a body. God is bigger than you are thinking. You're putting God in a box with anthropomorphisms, and the only thing we know that we can say decisively about God is God don't like to be put in no box. That's almost verbatim Rambam, almost. Okay, so yes, right? It's all metaphor, says Rambam, and says us. Debbie, then Martha.
So, but I don't know if this is, maybe I'm more paraphrasing from what was discussed last time. But what struck me, I was thinking about the image of a rock as being, what we consider permanent, or a sense of time. I mean, we have a human sense of time where we tend to think of rocks as being rather permanent. But if you think about geologic time, there's great change in rocks. And what I found powerful about the image of a rock and whatever we think of God is that God's time transcends our human ability to conceive of time, for the most part. That it's another reminder how things are larger than ourselves, and how things are connected in a way that's bigger than ourselves, and that that's okay. We don't have to know the answers to believe that there is order in this, or some order in the system.
Well, I'm getting my book and bringing it downstairs.
Yeah. Beautiful, Debbie. Thank you. So there's two metaphors that I have used elsewhere that I managed to refrain so far in this series, but you just gave me the entree. And these come from Aldo Leopold, 1949, a Sand County Almanac. Besides Peter and Debbie, who else has read Aldo Leopold? No? One of the classics of sort of the American environmental ethos, and truly a one-of-a-kind work. And he has two incredible metaphors that I've used in everything from Havdalahs to theology conversation. One is, as he speaks of the land ethic. That's actually a section of the book, is notes toward a land ethic. And one of them is the thinking like a mountain, right? And this, just that basic idea. The mountain is not eternal, but its lifespan is measured in millions of years. At the fractal level, there are changes constantly through weathering, etc. But in the grand scheme, the mountain more or less is there for millions of years. And if we can develop the ability to take that long view, then we're in good shape. So it gets to what you were saying, Debbie, and exactly to what Barb Richmond so beautifully elucidated on God as rock, that rock symbolizes permanence, but what that really means is permanence by human lifespan standards, not, right? You know, so theological time is geological time, not necessarily infinite, but just mind-bogglingly big. And if we can begin to think divinely, then if we can think about the implications of our actions down the line, that's what Aldo Leopold meant, thinking like a mountain. So that's a midrash on God as rock that Debbie inspired, and Barb inspired. And the other is this incredible image when he was young and a hunter and full of trigger itch, and out to get the wolves, because the wolf, a dead wolf means more cattle, and thinking in very human terms. But then once he shot a wolf and he went up to it and saw as it was dying, quote, the fierce green fire in its eyes. And at that moment, he realized that neither the wolf nor the mountain agreed with that view. Right? So a fire, as yet another of our metaphors, and the idea that connects to the natural world. Anyway, thank you for letting me digress on Aldo Leopold. Debbie knows I'll take any, such opportunity. Martha, please.
Okay, well, first the caveats. I am not an expert on Maimonides, and I read Toba Spitzer's book over the summer, and despite my best intentions, I have not reread it. What my understanding of Maimonides is that it's very logical and and whereas with Toba Spitzer, she puts the poetry into it. So yeah, we know that this big guy in the sky is a metaphor, and the days for that metaphor are long, long gone. But we can still relate to God's creation. It's almost Arthur Greenian, but in a very just very. I just find that she makes it very relatable. That this time in my life, I relate to God as fire, although I know that God is not only fire. And another time in my life, I don't relate to God at all. And another time in my life, it's like, oh, the rock, I'm going to hang on to the rock. So that's what I really love about her work.
Amen. So let's be clear that Toba and I both learned with Arthur Green at the tail end of his time at RRC. And Arthur Green had learned from Mordecai Kaplan, both directly and indirectly. Mordecai Kaplan indirectly had learned from Maimonides. Maimonides, and especially Kaplan, needed a good editor. Art Green is much more readable. And Toba is taking some of that best and getting right to the heart, to the kishkas, which is part of why, as soon as this came out, I and so many others said, wow, this is a defining book of modern Jewish theology and needs to be read and needs to be discussed. So yeah, I'm a little bit of an evangelist for it. And I think Martha is basically saying the same. And one of the things that hopefully comes out of tonight is that we are aware of how our spiritual lives are enriched by these explorations and these practices. And with just a little bit of that evangelism, we want to share that which we have found meaningful in the spiritual realm with others. We're not going to hit them over the head with it, but it's relatively soft, so wouldn't do a lot of damage. But that idea of kind of spreading and sharing and quoting liberally to help build the consciousness that every time we talk about God, we're in the realm of metaphor, and that there may be some newer and more natural and less human metaphors that have traditional pedigree that might work just as well or even better for you. May I recommend God as water, right? Etc. Okay. Anne, Bob?
In thinking about metaphors in this book that are words and thoughts, it made me think about metaphors in art and in images. In my field, patients who have migraines often have difficulty describing what it's like. And there are many artists who have migraines. And there's a whole field called migraine art. You can Google it. And there are some amazing artwork there. But if you don't want to show God as an old man up in the sky, you can't show a migraine, in and of itself, but you can create an artistic metaphor for what it's like, what it feels like, how it impacts you. And art is another way to create a metaphor of a kind of experience that leads you to think outside of the box.
Wow. Beautiful. Thank you. Nice. Right. Any others so far?
No.
Oh, go for it.
Okay. I guess the first half of the book, I guess, I was thinking that we could substitute Mother Nature for God, because so much of what the metaphors she was referring to were, water, fire, rocks, it was all these things in nature. And that made sense to me because, that's some of my most spiritual moments have been when I've been in awe of the things in nature. But I really found it even more fascinating when she left those and went in the latter part of the book, which maybe we'll talk about tonight, about it being like human potential for change and things like that. So I'm really interested in pursuing that. So that was taking me to a different level. I felt like I already do my gratefulness to Mother Nature a lot on my own before I read this book, but it's the second part of the book that I feel like I want to reread to sort of explore more.
Beautiful. So an interesting question that we will get to at the end tonight, maybe, is which of the metaphors resonated more? And I was thinking kind of metaphor by metaphor. There are 8 specific metaphors treated at length here. And for those of us who've been either through the book or through the class, sort of, what works and what doesn't, or what doesn't as well. An interesting question is the kind of lumping them, right? The more naturalistic versus the more conceptual or inner directed. And so thank you, Anne, and we'll keep that in mind as we explore. Beautiful. Any other observations, questions, anything before we dive in a little bit tonight? Okay, Marilyn, Mark?
So for me, this book For me, this book just brought together a lot of different ways different people try to approach the notion of God. And I consider myself like a newcomer to meditative practice. But it brought in both meditative practice, but then putting it in the context of so many examples of God's interactions with human beings and nature along the way, and then with all the different metaphors, which basically touched everything earthly that exists, basically. It put it all together in a way that I could really relate to, without going back into the childhood way of visualizing God. I felt it was turning a corner and integrating all these different kinds of ways that we Jews have tried to approach what is the deity.
All the way to the left.
Beautiful. Sorry, Mark, what was that?
Do you want to say something?
Computer instructions.
Computer instructions, code, go for it. Say more.
I was just telling Marilyn how to put a sudden.
Okay. I thought you were actually going to develop an analogy of God as computer code, which anyone have at it? God as Fortran, God as C++. I think it's got potential. Anyone want to do a spontaneous midrash? Ralph, of course.
I was going to say, I mean, it's even the idea of using a metaphor suggests that we can kind of surround it, we can replace it, and I think of God as an asymptote, something that's so beyond, it's it's dimensions above us. So I don't even like the idea of using a metaphor. That's almost too. That's almost. It's limiting. It suggests that we can comprehend it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Nice. Okay. Again, we can't put God in a box, and therefore we also can't put any divine metaphor in a box. It is all uncontainable. It's getting interesting. Thank you. All right. Any other broad perspectives? Judy.
Going back to the computers, artificial intelligence to a degree feels more like it than anything specific, because again, we don't fully understand artificial intelligence. We set it in motion and then don't always have a great deal of control over it. I mean, when I taught middle school, I had this little game where we understood what the artificial learning was, but that's so simple in terms of what it is. So that almost feels like something undefined and that has potential that we don't even fully understand.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Right. In AI, they talk about black box, the idea that certain designs are meant to be inscrutable, and therein lies a potential danger. If we don't know what's going on, but it has potential to develop power beyond what we can sort of work with or control, that's the stuff of nightmares and negative utopian sci-fi and or futurism, depending on who you talk to. Right, so back to the box. Tonight we are anti-boxes. Vita, please. You've got to unmute. Lower left.
What I found frightening, and I guess maybe awesome, was part in the book where she says there is a power in the universe whose name is becoming. And she says, God is infinite potential. God is change. And I'm afraid of change. So I found that kind of awesome.
Right. Awesome in that dual sense of scary and yet really profound, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Thank you. So that's actually one of the passages I pulled out for discussion as tonight unfolds. So you'll actually have a chance to do a little chevruta on that image of God as change. Thinking that might be a rich vein to tap, and I think you just proved it. So awesome, thank you. Okay, shall we take a quick look at some metaphors? So as I've said before, a lot of people that I know who are teaching this book, or book discussion groups that are going over it, they are doing one chapter at a time. And any one chapter and its metaphors and the texts within it and the texts around it could easily be worth a session. So the joke is that we tried to do the whole book in just 3. So the first time was everything about metaphors writ large, and then the first one, which was water. And then last time, we had the audacity to try 3 whole metaphors in one, right? Place and rock and listening, sound, right? Well, tonight, 4. And that is utterly ridiculous. So what I have done, as you'll see on the screen share, is the same as before, where I take each of Toba's subheadings and kind of make little notes, but I've also put in purple only the ones we're going to talk about. So the whole thing is there. It will be sent to anyone who's interested, and there's food for thought as a kind of summary of some of the most resonant pieces of what she does. But we are going to try to be less than comprehensive so that we can talk about 3 of those metaphors very quickly, like 4 minutes each, right? And then go to our first chevruta moment, which will be on God as change. And then we're going to spin through the last one and have another chevruta moment. And then we want to devote the rest of our time to putting it all together and looking at as a whole. So tonight, we are going broad and not deep. And if that offends you, I hear you. How can we not go deep in this? On the other hand, how can we not go broad? And if there is interest down the line in a ongoing discussion group that plays with each metaphor sequentially, I would say have at it. Right. So it's the same. I don't know why lately screen share only lets me share the screen, and so you don't get to see all of it. Is this large enough to be legible? Yeah, 3rd session? Great. All right, let me get, sorry that 4 of you have your faces up. It's just showing the screen. It is what it is. All right. Okay. Cloud, anan. We have the image of the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. So those 2 are next to each other. And the pieces that I wanted to focus on were going into the cloud, the image that Moses ascended into the cloud that was atop Mount Sinai. And this incredible image that we sort of have to face the fear of the unknown and be willing to enter into the cloud. It's the quality of awareness, right? Aware that divinity was in the cloud, which also relates to the Buddhist concepts that when we have obstacles or distractions, they are clouding, as it were, our best spiritual selves. And so any spiritual practice that brings clarity and or that brings courage to enter the cloud and see through the veil and get to a place of clarity, if the cloud obscures it from a distance, that is our goal. And she references, and we hear clouds, and most of us tend to think, I've looked at clouds from both sides now, right? Which is itself a potential source of metaphor, and we could spend longer with that. All right, but then I don't know how many of you saw the cute, ridiculous phenomenon film Don't Look Up. All right, the metaphor about climate change in the form of a comet coming to us and a president who doesn't exactly believe in science, and the trouble that can come from it. All right, so I kept thinking of that in this beautiful Reb Nachman idea of look at the sky. So for those who didn't read, I just want to share in a nutshell, Reb Nachman of Bratslav is alive in 1800, so that's kind of the heart of his adulthood, so two centuries ago, and a very deep thinker with an incredible biography another time. Reb Nachman sees one of his congregants basically in the marketplace and says, "So new, have you looked up at the sky today?" And he's like, "Rabbi, I'm busy. It's the market day. I don't have time to look up at the sky." And he says, "What's so important that you don't have any time to look at the sky? I promise you, in 50 years, all this merchandise and all these profits and all of it will just be distant memories, but the sky will still be there. So what's so important that you can't look up?" So first, obviously that's a metaphor for, right, he's saying the sky is Shamayim, which is another name of the heavenly realm, right? So by sky, he means heavens. So essentially he's saying, have you put spirituality on your agenda on an otherwise material day, right? Which is a beautiful frame, right? When you log onto your brokerage account and think about your holdings, and it's a good day, it's a bad day, whatever, right? Do you have a spiritual angle there? Or are you Jewish in shul and just shrewd marketplace person, amoral, when you're focused on business? Hopefully not, right? This is meant to be an all-encompassing thing. All right, 2, this is Toba's midrash on what Reb Nachman might mean. Stop. Actually, you know what? I'm going to stop. We should have another voice. Who wants to read number 2 and then number 3? So 2 is what Toba thinks Reb Nachman meant, and 3 is when she did an exercise asking her congregants, a fellow Reconstructionist in Newton, Mass, noted this powerful observation. So 2 and 3, someone to unmute, please.
I can read.
Thank you.
2, stop. Notice this beautiful world of which you are a part. Take a moment to get some perspective. Are you doing what you really want to be doing with your life? Are you happy? Are you running towards something worthwhile, or perhaps you're running away from something else? And 3, a congregant. Clouds change quickly. One moment the sky cam can be cloudless. Look up again. The clouds are moving in. It shows us that things can change quickly. They may be dark at one moment, but the sun returns.
Thank you. So look up, meaning keep religion and ethics and spirituality in your constant field of vision. 2, look up and just gain perspective. Look at the big picture. And 3, look up and you have an instant analogy for the famous idea, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass, right?
And I might add that there's a lot sacred to be learned in the cloud, whether it's the cloud of struggle or whether it's the cloud where we sense divinity and it's so fleeting.
Nice. Thank you. Hear, hear.
And I also want to just mention the clouds that have the silver lining because the sun is behind them.
Nice. Beautiful. So lots of great practices that go with this, and we've already implied some of them, and we're not going to talk about those right now. Chapter 8, Holy Fire, the famous image of the sneh, right? The bush that Moses, 2/3 of the way into his life, when he's already been in Midian for a long time, he's a family man and a shepherd, right? And the moment of his call is he sees the bush burning, which in the desert, this happens. It's dry. You get a little lightning, someone dropped a Coke bottle and the sun rays focus on it. That was a huge problem in ancient Midian, right? And next thing you know, there's a little fire of a bush. You actually have to note and watch for a while to see that the bush, v'hasneh eineno uchal, that it was burning, but it was not consumed. So I love when she was teaching this material with a group of Jewish activists, one of them noted that, this is the moment of Moses's call to be an activist. Moses's call to put his body and his family and his life on the line for justice. To take this on, you have to have a fire burning within, an anger about injustice, a passion for the work of liberation. But that fire can overwhelm and consume you. So Toba summarizes: a bush that is aflame, yet not consumed by the fire, becomes a powerful metaphor for the godly work of liberation. So one angle of thinking of divinity as located somehow in fire is the simultaneous necessity and danger of the fire that burns within as we do the important work that we have to do. Related, this is the advantage of reading a modern book. She speaks of, after the George Floyd murder and the riots, right? Someone to volunteer to read June 2020?
I'll do it.
Thanks.
A holy anger accompanied by actual fire blazed in those protests. Like the consuming fire of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, once the fires of the protests were unleashed, they could not be easily controlled. Collective anger at injustice, like the flames that erupt when Yud-Heh Vav-Heh is angry, can get out of control. Yet out of those flames can also come disruptive and necessary transformation. Perhaps, hopefully, a true remelting is occurring, one in which the structures and ideologies of racism will be melted down so that something new and better, something truly wondrous can emerge.
So such a beautiful application of a metaphor rooted in the scholarship that shows above that ancient images of the divine were associated with metallurgy, the intense transformative power of flame and heat, to offer a hopeful gloss on the work that has to happen, right? This is simultaneously a clear-eyed assessment of structural racism and its devastation. And Toba is an incredible educator on that. It comes through in this book, but her position in the Reconstructionist movement is as one of the great expositors of this. And she's made some great analogies in publication and elsewhere that have really advanced the racial justice reckoning that the Reconstructionist movement is taking so seriously and with influence far beyond. So it's simultaneously deeply aware of the problem and at the same time hopeful by applying this lens. So good stuff there. So much more, but when it comes to the practice, There's a whole lot there, like meditate on a fire, which you can do with a fireplace, a candle, etc. Work with your anger to keep it focused in sacred directions. But the one that I wanted to, the two actually, to focus on, like me, Toba is also a big fan of Rabbi David Jaffe, whose book we'll be discussing after, the third in our books this year, and who will be visiting us in March. And she is deeply influenced by Musar as well. And she brings up what Alan Marinis, one of the leading modern expositors of Musar, has talked about the image of the match and the fuse, right? Which is this notion that our anger is a match and it can blaze into flame with all of its potential power. Remember the idea of transformative yet dangerous power, right? And all it takes is some friction and the match lights. So the question is, how long is your fuse? Or how good are you at keeping the match away from the fuse, putting some distance there so that you can have anger and not create an explosion that ends up hurting you and those around you? Such a powerful image, right? But it's rooted in this idea of fire as having simultaneously potential and peril. So I love that one. And then the next one, from scarcity to gratitude, is the basic idea. We heard this from David Teutsch and Marilyn Price, summarizing their wonderful little book of blessings at the retreat back pre-COVID at Pearlstone. But a core idea in Musar, a core idea in modern self-help and ecological thinking, which is celebrate what you have, develop an attitude of gratitude, and emphasize the positive wherever possible. In Musar language, that is hakarat hatov, the lifting up of the positive, right? The effort to emphasize that which is good. And that too, she links with in this analogy of fire, though I don't remember exactly how she got there. So anyway, all kinds of good stuff in this book is the bottom line on fire. And one more before we chevrut, becoming. So again, she learned, as I did, from Arthur Green, and Arthur Green, long after we studied with him, wrote this incredible book, Eheyeh, A Kabbalah for Tomorrow. If you were going to read only one of Art's books, I might recommend this one. The subsequent book was called Radical Judaism, and that's also a really good one-volume intro to the incredibly deep thought of one of the greatest living Jewish theologians. And Toba is deeply in Art Green's debt. So I have a picture of Art's book, right? Next to the idea of Eheyeh. And this becomes important at the end when we talk about bringing this into prayer, because one of the great names of God in the Torah, the one that God says God's own name is at that burning bush moment, right? There's actually this subtle sequence, right? We have the cloud of the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. And then we have the fire of the burning bush, which is where Eheyeh, the idea of becoming, comes from. So Toba's got it, right? But at this moment, God says, you want to know who I am? You, right? Who sent you? Yeah, I will be that I will be. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. I am becoming that I am becoming. You got a problem with that? That's me. And this idea, because it is in future tense, Eheyeh, I will be what I will be. And that's God's name. And the cool thing about it, if you look at the Hebrew over here in the book, right, it's It's all these soft letters, Aleph, He, Yud. It's a lot like Yud, He, Vav, He, which are the other soft letters. These are breath. These are becoming. These are undefinable. The best names of God are the ones that we don't even quite know how to pronounce, because they transcend the hard world of consonants. They even transcend gender. Ehyeh is in Hebrew, either a female or a male would say that. The future tense is the same. All the other tenses are gender specific. The future is not. So as we think about a history of gendered metaphors for God, but a future that isn't, we may be getting somewhere. So I love how she drashes it, right? What's he really saying in this passage when Moses says, stammering, right? Okay, so this disembodied voice came to me at a burning bush that wasn't consumed and tells me to go to the world's mightiest mean guy and say, let my people go. Well, who am I even going to say to the Israelites, sent me on this crazy mission? It is as if Moses is to say to his enslaved kin, there is a power, capital P, you see how Kaplanian this is, a power in the universe whose name is becoming. What is now is not what will be in the future. The power of transformation will free you from slavery because it, with a capital I, makes possible the most audacious change. What Vida underlined earlier, if God is the ultimate potentiality of all potentiality, then change is godly. And you can hear there a little Harold Schulweis, another student of Kaplan, who coined the idea of predicate theology. You don't say God is change, you say change is godly. And you put the focus on the predicate that we can actually wrap our heads around a little more. Change is godly. That is awesome in both senses of the word. Lots of good stuff there. I loved the Octavia Butler little 6-line poem here. All right, channeling Musar. This is Octavia Butler, well-known modern sci-fi writer. I want to encourage, let's do this as a group reading, but each of you to your muted screen, all right, with a full 2-second pause between each line. All right, ready? God is change, and hidden within change is surprise, delight, confusion, pain, discovery, loss, opportunity, and growth. So, stop share. Sorry, gotta try to pull all this together real quick. I'm dropping in the chat the direction, except we don't have 7 anymore, so we'll do 4 or 5 minutes. And I am going to break you up into groups of roughly 4, which means everybody has roughly a minute. How or where or when do you resonate, or don't you resonate with the idea that God is change? And you can just focus on any one of those things. When have you had a godly moment of surprise or confusion or discovery or growth, etc.? So breakout rooms, we're going to create 7, and that'll be 3 or 4. Have at it. 1 minute each, roughly. Go. anyone who's still on, if I can assign you, great, but looking good. Well, back.
That was awfully quick.
It was. It's a little crazy. The challenge is good pedagogy. I hope we all want to talk. There isn't enough room for all of us to talk in a short session. So we create these moments when it is possible. And as much as I'd love to hear insights and report backs, we are off to the races. Because there's still another metaphor and then putting it all together, and 33 minutes for all of it. So here is a praying, and here comes the screen. There we go. Okay, chapter 10, living in the material world, living in a material world, material. God, sorry, I grew up in the 80s. Beautiful, again, mute please. Beautiful exploration. Kabbalah talks about everything is kind of part of God, except that we need to lift up the realm of the physical. And this, by the way, is a core tenet of feminist theology, going back to the 60s and 70s, Mary Daly, Judith Plaskow, some of the earliest. This is not footnoted here, but it's kind of the backdrop that throughout so much of Western religion, women have been associated with physicality or gashmiut, probably because of the procreative, ability. And men have been associated with ruchaniut, ruach, spirituality. And that bifurcation has led to a lot of pain along the way. And so when she lifts up the realm of the physical as divine, that is actually feminist theology in doing its sacred work. Where all that leads, after the remarkable analogy of God as electricity, and specifically plugging in, is the GPS, and man, I loved this, I bet a lot of you did too, the godly positioning system. So let's see if we can pull it all up in one. Yeah, all right. There we go, maybe, yeah. All right, so 3 pieces of godly positioning system. Just, right, imagine GPS made divine, subtle, not like she's ever had an experience of a disembodied voice insistently, in 500 hours, turn toward the person next to you. Right? right? But there have been moments of listening and discerning, of taking a step in a new direction, following heart and mind, telling me what's the right thing to do. These have led me to who I am today. I heard a long time ago from, he didn't know where it came from, but I learned it from Michael Feshbach, the rabbi who was at Temple Shalom and then was on St. Thomas for a while, that humans are retroactive meaning makers. Right? So we ascribe significance to that which has happened, which doesn't mean that there was a master plan. We don't have to believe in an interventionist God or angels or miracles, nothing that completely defies the natural order, but we still make meaning out of what has happened. And if we can discern patterns at key moments in our lives, then that is our godly positioning system. But a key piece of it too here is, where are you? If the GPS is going to work, we need to first know where we are. And that is the very first question in the Torah. When they, at the moment of the first disobedience in the garden, God calls out Ayeka, where are you? Which famously has huge ethical tones to it, as we looked at earlier, which ultimately is a question not where you are, but who you are. One of our most basic spiritual tasks is to foster an awareness of who we really are, our location vis-a-vis those around us, which then gets to another classical line, Hineni, I am here. Once you know, once you've answered Ayeka, then you can say Hineni, two of the great refrains of the Bible so beautifully fused together. I am here. We say that to ourselves and to others. This is me. And as a good communitarian, because she is a Reconstructionist, right? There's a map and there's a minion. So for the GPS, we need a commitment to learning and incorporating the mapping data, right? Which means you need an ongoing spiritual practice. Maybe it's yoga, meditation, Shabbat, Musar, whatever. But you need to keep the new data coming in. And the final component is the data we receive from other travelers. The real-time crashes, backups, potholes, and roadwork. And if we take that at the spiritual level, the godly positioning system analogy, the divine is manifesting community in all those traveling along with us, because on the journey, we each contribute information and receive it. Now, all of that goes through the cloud, right? As in the computer, the internet cloud, but such a powerful idea that we need each other's real-time data on their spiritual quests in order to make the most of our own. That is one of those multiplier effects of community. And I just love that. So on the practices from this last of the 8 or 9 metaphors discussed in great length, that are really fleshed out here, she teaches another Musar piece, which some of you have come across from me or Martha or others along the way. This is from Rav Eliyahu Dessler, who is World War II era, one of the greats of the sort of late modern, early contemporary period. And he coined the notion of nikudat habechira, a choice point, bechira point. And the idea is to be abundantly aware of where your spiritual and ethical framework is. So the easiest analogy of this is stealing, right? There are some people who are hardened criminals, and they are going to try to steal. So their bechira point is, if they are caught, how violently How much bodily injury are they willing to do to another in order not to be caught? Their choice is, well, yeah, I'm going to steal. The question is, will I murder? Right? And then there are those of us who would never dream. It's just out of our consciousness to even think about simply pilfering. But then maybe we go to what the rabbis call genevat da'at, the stealing of awareness by saying something that is a little bit misleading, right? So the full accuracy of our speech becomes a choice point, and none of us is exempt from that. So it's like asking, where is the front in trench warfare, right? In World War I, right? The trenches are there in Eastern Belgium and the Ardennes forest, right? And so it doesn't make great sense to talk about some ethical thing that you do deep in the home front, because that's too easy. It also doesn't make sense to try to say, wow, I want to become so much better, as if I'm going to suddenly be catapulted 300 kilometers, near the enemy capital to end the war. No. Where am I? Ayeka, hineni. And what's the ethical room that I have to maneuver now? So if it, based on this idea of godly positioning, to really figure out where you are and what are the ethical and spiritual choices in front of us. I was going to do another chevruta, but I'm looking at the clock. So maybe it's enough to simply acknowledge the choice points. And let's take 1 minute and just reflect for yourself on when or where you have brought self-awareness to your own GPS.
Before we do it, is it possible, Fred, that you could just move that back the page so we can see the various bullets associated with this on the screen? Because right now I can see God as electricity and GPS practices, but
sorry, it's just these 2 lines here.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. All right.
Sorry, yeah, that I was droshing it. Yeah, okay. 30 seconds, a little quiet. GPS. When we have longer, when we do Musar together, this is a really deep place to go, and I hope we will have lots of those opportunities. All right, a musical moment. Some of you know this, and if you don't, there's just a bunch of these natural metaphors in this song that's translated into many languages. Here is the Hebrew and the English. Many of you know it, and if you don't, the words are here. And there's sort of 3 claps at the end of each beat. It'll become pretty obvious. Adama v'shamayim, chom ha'esh, tzlil ha'mayim, ani margish zo begufi, beruchi benishmati. Heya, 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 ho. Heya, 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 ho. Heya, 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 heya. Heya, 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 ho. Love the earth, love the sky, heat of fire, drop of water. I can feel it in my body, in my spirit, in my soul. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. Hey ya, 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 ho. God as earth, represented in rock. God as sky, represented as cloud. God as fire. God as water. I can feel it with a capital I in my body, in my spirit, in my soul. God as king. Do you feel that in your body, in your spirit, in your soul? God as Lord, Master. I don't only mean to diss the traditional metaphors. I personally find the ones Toba's pointing us toward so much more conducive to spiritual growth and reflection that I personally want to start using them in prayer. I'm going to leave that door open for all of us in a moment. But first, putting it all together, we got water, place, sound, rock, cloud, fire, becoming, and materiality. As promised, this is a chance to simply reflect. And if there's one that really doesn't work for you, and you can briefly articulate why, let's do that. But if there's one that really works for you, name that briefly. Putting the list in the chat, go. One that really works, maybe one that really doesn't. Okay, so place and becoming are the two that seem most becoming to people in this place. Okay, cloud resonates. Rock works, materiality, not so much, right? Interesting, nice. And yet rock is material as opposed to spiritual, right? But but again, not all of this works for all of us, and each of these metaphors works in many ways. So maybe we resonate with the global position, godly positioning system, but not with God as electricity. Though remember, Ira Eisenstein used the analogy of God as electricity, someone else influential for a lot of us. Okay. Just thank you. Using the chat is great because we can get a lot of ideas from a lot of people quickly. So Fran, becoming is living up to my best, always striving, and it's a never-ending process, right? Anne and Bob, all the natural ones, but the materiality maybe felt like a stretch, a little confusing. I think that's fair. It's pretty ethereal. Cloud and fire. No one had yet said fire. Right, the fear and the fascination that go with it, which is precisely the point of simply meditate on a candle when Hanukkah's coming up, right? Like take advantage of that time to reflect on it. Struggling with the idea of God as change, which is under the idea of becoming, right? And we should note, I don't remember if Toba actually wrote it, but the classic read of Yud He Vav He is that those three soft letters, Yud He and Vav, are conjugatable as both was, is, and will be. Haya, Hove, Yihiyeh. As in, Vehu Haya, Vehu Hove, Vehu Yihiyeh Betifara, right? So was, is, will be is Yud He Vav He. So the very traditional name of God that is usually translated as Lord, right, is actually becoming. So maybe there's something there. All right. Oh, God is the smile of my Father. Thank you. Because where this ultimately leads is these are 8 metaphors that all have some root in tradition and all have a modern angle as well. Who's to say we can't generate our own? Where do you find God? And maybe one of those places where you experience divinity is powerful enough that it becomes a metaphor that works for you. Okay. Shelley, use these in prayer before choosing which one works best. Love it, right? Some of you may remember a long time ago at a retreat, we explored this one biblical verse in Exodus 24, verse 7, Na'aseh v'nishma. We're standing at Sinai, we just got the commandments, and the people say with one voice, Na'aseh, we will do, v'nishma, and we will listen, we will understand. What's up with that order? How can you do before you understand? But if you think about experiential education, then actually, yeah, how can you understand without doing? So a recommendation, try these on. Try them on in prayer. Try them on in meditation. Try them on in personal practice. And only maybe by trying will you see what resonates. Thank you, Shelley. Beautiful. Okay. Cloud, yay, smile. RPC, open to substitution of some of these metaphors instead of Lord. Well, they better be, because I use them already from the Bima. And there is an RPC meeting tomorrow night. And if any of you want to go and say, we need some serious feminist and naturalistic theology from the Bima, I would love the backup. So thank you. Right on, Ellen. Great. All right. Edits to the Amidah. Bingo. So it's interesting. Some of the very musicians that we have been exposed to lately, Nava Tehillah, that wonderful group that did so many of the Friday night psalms that we hear Cheryl and Beth and Jeff sing. And our 3 guests ago, whose smicha came from the same program as Rachel. This is Shir Yaakov Fight, right? They are writing the modern liturgy ahead of where we are, because they are already assuming that you should say eheyeh, or you should say havaya, right? Becoming or existence, these gender neutral, non-anthropomorphic, powerful, with great pedigree names in your prayer. Recalculating, nice, right? So let us recalculate, let us reconstruct, right? And I want to invite you in your own prayer practice to use any of these. They're just as kosher and maybe more effective than as Melech or Yod He Vav He, or etc. Right? So we're in the home stretch. We've named some of the things that work well for us. We've pointed at some of those that maybe don't. And we've introduced the idea of try it on for size. So if every name of God is just a metaphor, I'm going to share Toba's closing lines from that little postscript, the end and the beginning. Actually, volunteer to read these 2 short paragraphs.
I'll go ahead and read.
Thank you.
Because experiences of divinity encompass all aspects of our lives, joy and sorrow, birth and death, love and anger and compassion, and because each of us has our own unique sensibilities, we need a multitude of metaphors to access those experiences. No one metaphor will do. As an ancient midrash teaches, just because we call God different things in different situations doesn't mean there is more than one God. The main thing to remember is that metaphors aren't right or wrong. They are simply different pathways to the truth of our own experience and of the world around us.
Oh dear, battery running low. How's that for an analogy? Multitude of metaphors. That is your alliteration of the day. Multitude of metaphors. Love it. Different pathways to the truth. Debbie, please.
So one reaction I had is what's striking in its absence, perhaps, and maybe that's because I read too much like Jay Michelson or something, is everything is, the metaphors are all external, and they're not really about our internal self.
Sorry, speak up a little.
Okay, so the metaphors here are all external, or largely external, and they're not really about God dwelling within, in my view, at least the way we've been describing them, which I just find interesting.
That's absolutely worth noting. I see Fran and Anne, and I just want to remind us that the traditional metaphors like Lord and King are also external.
Right.
And interestingly, the biggest exception to those of the traditional is the one feminine. The Shekhinah is the indwelling presence. So we've always needed to go to the feminine or the feminist in order to get that, the interiority piece of it. But nice. Okay. Fran, Anne, then Peter.
Thank you. I want to push back a little bit, Debbie. I think becoming is a very internal process for me. And the other thing, the other metaphor that she talks about that feels like an internal process for me, although she talks about it as an external process, is place. Because for me, the place is in me. And I really love that. And I actually use that in meditation a lot, that the God within me, and there's also the God within you and you and you and everybody on the Zoom call and everybody in the world. And I find that very, very centering and very uplifting.
Appreciate that. And remember, water also, one of the powerful pieces of that is that we are 2/3 water, just like the Earth's surface is. And so that's yet another metaphor that is truly within and not just above and beyond. And so nice, thank you. Anne, then Peter.
So it's totally internal. It's all about us becoming the better version of ourselves, working on that day after day, in every interaction thing. How could I have done that better? And how could I be a better person? That's what it's all about. It's all internal. The other ones, the nature ones, also resonated with me, not as much as becoming, but because to me, they were all about gratitude, that not taking the world for granted, not taking where I am in the water, the everything for not taking it. So that was the other piece. That's all.
Right.
Right. Likewise, I was going to concur with Fran. I thought that she moved actually from the external ones to the internal ones. And I thought the hinge one was cloud, when she talked about a cloud as being external, but constant change. And I thought of myself as when I move into a spiritual practice, ascending into a cloud, and actually the kind of internal, looking for some kind of internal constancy. And that got to your Bashira points. This is looking for that kind of, and the role of ritual in helping us when we get to those difficult points in a constantly changing world. So we are becoming. So I thought that she moved to the harder ones, to the becoming ones. And I thought she set it up well by giving us the concreteness of the rock and the water.
Concreteness of the rock. Nice.
Well, yeah.
Don't usually hear concreteness of the water. But
It turns
yes.
turns out we're suffering from overwhelming concreteness in our civilization.
Exactly, and too much concrete, and the water doesn't go where it needs to. So yes, each of these metaphors begets more. Thank you so much, Peter. Beautiful. Ralph.
Yeah, I like both the nature part because it's a connection to try and understand what's around us. And yet nature is going to be there anyway, even after we're not there. And the personal part is that as we begin to connect to godliness, it makes us act in a certain manner. And so to kind of add on to what Fran was saying, I think it's when we get God in us, it affects how we act. And so in some way we aspire and we try to do what's right. And the more we get imbued with that, the better we become.
Nice. Aspiration. So maybe related to becoming, but becoming with the notion of improving, right? God has changed, but change for the better. And God as asymptote, right? To use a naturalistic metaphor drawn from the abstract world of trying to explain things in numbers, right? The asymptote, we use this often for tikkun olam and eschatology, right? It's not that we believe there will be a Messiah, but we want to more closely approximate the Messianic era, like the curve that nearly reaches the y-axis and keeps closing the gap and yet never quite gets there. So we will never truly be God, but we are striving to be ever more godly. So God is the asymptote and we are the curve, right? That's another one that doesn't maybe have the traditional biblical pedigree, but is very much in consonance with all of this. Okay. Right, Phyllis, love the ing part of the words, right? Remember, God is a verb. And so at least a gerund, and the ing is maybe the best possible suffix for any English approximation of God. Nice. And yes, God is a verb, David Cooper, good book, yeah. Nice. All right, a lot of good Torah surfaced in 88 minutes. This may be a natural break point on time for a change, but I'm very happy to continue the conversation. Does anyone have any closing thoughts, blessings, etc.?
Thank you.
Thank you for being on this exploration together. And again, you can be just a little bit evangelistic about some of these metaphors, whether it's at the Religious Practices Committee or by audibly using some of these names in your own davening, etc. Shake it up a little bit. That's what we've always done. Water-ing, rock-ing. Oh, Barb, you are rocking it. Thank you. Yet again, right? So all of these, yes, being, right?
Can you share these materials that you've shared on your screen? Send it out to us.
Happily. Debbie, how, I'm not sure how, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. That's a good question because I haven't exactly kept track of who's here. But
you know, there is a spot on the website. I can send them as PDFs to
maybe you can just put that on the
the
Jewish
office,
Studies,
maybe.
website.
Put it on the website. Okay,
That'd be great.
thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Ooh,
I
Paula,
want to
love
thank
it.
everybody for being here too. Just continuing to help us as a congregation engage in these kind of discussions.
Here, here. Thank you. Again, thanks to Debbie and Luther of the Jewish Studies Committee. Thanks to Barb, a co-teacher of the last one and inspiration for so much of this. To Martha and Nancy of the Makom Committee, because this is not just a Jewish studies in the sense of learn the material. It's a Makom thing in terms of be the material, practice it, which is what so much of what Fran offers and Cheryl offers. We've got such an amazing community for all of this. And next up, Sherry Lincoln with a book discussion group of He, She, It, the 1991 historical fiction meets negative futuristic utopia with a reconstructionist eco-feminist bent. My favorite novel of all time. So get a copy and discuss it with Sherry Lincoln in January, and then get a copy of David Jaffe's book that Toba refers to, Changing the World from the Inside Out, and we'll be discussing that in February. Lisa, please.
Would anyone be interested in a book club to do a chapter of this book and then talk about it over the next several months, winter? Just let me know, because I think it might be worthwhile, and we could do it on Zoom, and it would be something good to think about over the winter.
Love that. In this safe space, would you put your email into the chat and
Sure,
and people can reach you?
well, they should not be because I'm in the show, but okay, I'll put it in right now.
Right. Awesome. Right.
Okay. But I think that would be, worthwhile and give us more time to delve into it a little deeper.
Agree. Barb has been doing that with a different book discussion group and maybe has some ideas or resources. Not that you would want to not necessarily do it again, but you might, who knows? So good stuff here. Thank you. Yes, circulating a list. I'm actually going to find, I had created a little box. If you have your Kol HaNeshama nearby, page 5, and a couple of other places, one of the really amazing things of our Siddur is all the way back in 1994, and even the first edition, 1989, the pilot Friday night one, had this notion of kind of the Chinese menu of make your own blessing. And you can use the traditional masculine, you can change it to feminine, or you can do a gender neutral based on Marcia Falk's incredible liturgy. And that was opening a lot of doors to simply say you can put Shekhinah anytime it's Yud He Vav He, which we usually pronounce Adonai, but you look at Yud He Vav He, there ain't no duh or na in it, right? So what does Adonai mean? Adon is master. Literally what a slave says to their owner. We are calling God our master. And yet the verb, it's Yud He Vav He, it's breath, it's becoming, right? So anytime there's a name of God in the liturgy, you get to pick your own. And that's already been in our prayer book for 25 years, but it didn't include eheyeh, and it didn't include mayim, water, or tsur, rock, etc. Every single one of these you can use in your own prayer as well as your own meditation. So I'll supply a starter list that's a little bigger than the traditional blessing box, Karen, and that'll be in near the end of the printout of today's resources. But let's keep expanding it so that our ancestors' smile is on the list, and asymptote is on the list, and any others that work for us, let's keep sharing them. I'm happy to keep on. Some people are filtering off, but hands are being raised. So Lisa, then Debbie.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
And mine's very quick, but I would like to suggest that perhaps as we look to the next program year, which I won't be responsible for, but I'll still throw out the suggestion, something to put in the back of your mind. I think it'd be great to have a congregational or something like this on Art Green's Eheyeh. Art Green is not easy to read. I have tried to read Radical Judaism numerous times. I've seen him speak. I love it. I get about 25 pages in, and I'm sort of overwhelmed by the vocabulary. It just requires powers of concentration that are probably beyond me. Even though I love the concepts, I would love to be part of a facilitated reading, as I was years ago as Jewish Studies Center, of Art Green. And I think it might be really the perfect place for people to get introduced to his theology. So I'm going to put it out there as an idea.
Quick focus group. Who might be interested in exploring Art Green together? Okay, some. All right. It's a little dense, but actually, as deep theologians go, it's on the accessible end, and really good stuff. So I would recommend. Okay, cool. So there's at least some interest. Happy to pursue. Cool. Okay, Mark, you want to share?
Yeah, I apologize. I won't be able to come to the meeting tomorrow night, so I have a question / comment that I maybe would have wanted to make, and that is, if we use if we adopt a different name for God in our prayers from the Bima, I hope it's not a selection of one of these metaphors, rather than not because I have any objection to them, but on the contrary, because if I'm davening and your metaphor from the Bima is water and mine is rock, I think it's too limiting. So whatever new, and I'm very open to having something new, but I wanted to be inclusive so that I can pick my the metaphor that is most spiritually meaningful to me at that moment, and not to be limited.
I was about to make the same joke that Barb just put in the chat, right? Like you know, a rock makes a splash in the water, but the water quenches the fire, but the fire can even burn the rock, right? Yeah, I love it. God has no match. Oh, you light my fuse, Ralph. All right. So Mark raises the really good and interesting point, which is the challenge of this, and this is part of why we often default to Melech or Adonai, right? Because we can all think this are whatever we want, but it's a little confusing. And I've certainly gotten that when I occasionally use feminist God language in prayer. Some people say, thank you so much, it's about time. That's really liberating. And others say, what's going on here? I have a hard enough time following as it is, and I don't really speak this language. And now you're not even saying what's in the book, right? Which then gets to the deeper question of what is in the book or what should be. And the idea that the next generation of Siddur may entirely be loose leaf. so that we can just keep inserting, right?
Or an
Or perhaps entirely digital,
right.
which is a separate RPC conversation. But then you can change in real time and add graphics and personalize, right? And we
Then
yeah,
yell at
so
kids when you don't want them on the screens.
exactly, right. Does that count as your screen time allocation for the day if you're davening off of a siddur, which, by the way, traditional people do all the time now. Like the weekday siddur is on every Orthodox person's phone, right? Because why lug around a siddur? So you can daven from it. You just can't do it on Shabbos. So if it's an interesting question, since we're not halachic, right? Anyway, come to the RPC. Karen, then Ralph.
Yeah, just a very quick comment, which is the alternatives that are currently in your siddur. I mean, I'm exploring Reconstructionism, as you know, but I did see those alternatives and I don't remember the list, that have been there, as you just said, for 25, 30 years in the siddur. I think it would be good to reemphasize them, because I was very taken with that when I looked at them. I mean, Shekhinah, I know, but there were a number of others, that I've seen in other places, in other chavurot. But yeah, I think those were good, generic, and don't sort of constrain one or confine one to a metaphor that may or may not work at any given time. So that's all I wanted to say.
Appreciate that. And you're actually amplifying what Judy had put in the chat, how liberating just the first time you pick up a prayer book that has these alternative words. It's a reminder that we have choice, that we don't check our brain when we enter shul, and we don't check our heart when we enter shul either. So, Ralph.
Yeah, I think it's good to start throwing it around, because it throws people off balance, and it suddenly creates an awareness. Somebody says they want the more traditional, you say, okay, so what is it opens up a discussion. And so all of a sudden it makes it an active, it makes it a verb, it makes it a focus, it makes it an awareness. So I think you should throw people off like that.
Right. Like in the venture capital world, where disruptive is actually a compliment, right? So, all right. Nice. Mark.
I have to disagree strongly, because in my davening, I don't want to be taking time to be disputing. It removes me from what the davening does for me. Before, if there's a time that we take for Torah discussion, I love it. I really appreciate it. But to be disrupted in the middle of my davening for me, would be harmful.
Right.
What
Because
if we
after
were-
all, shul is not venture capitalist, right? So, Shelley.
What if we were to try with the silent Amidah? That's private, personal, quiet. And we work on maybe playing with the English there. I don't know whether that means, I don't know what that means, Mark. You're muted, so I can't hear what you're saying.
It means I just ate something. I'm sorry.
Oh. I thought it was a reaction to, oh my God.
God is a burrito.
Anyway, I think it would be really an interesting project to take parts of our siddur, the English, where which when we're focusing on the Hebrew, I know most of the time I'm reading the English because my Hebrew is not so great, but I would love to see different words in English than what's there. So that's just my thought.
Nice. So every once in a while, back when I did my own handouts before the pandemic, sometimes I would print that expanded blessing box that included Eheyeh and Havaya and some of these others. And I think actually Rock was on there, but some of these others weren't. So I would love to expand that, and sometimes on the back of that handout that we're now doing weekly, of just print this more modern version of the blessing box on page 5 from 1994 that opens the door even further and say, before the silent Amidah, if you want to say pronounce it the way you always have, and the words starting on page 295, go for it. It's the silent Amidah. But equally, if you want to be as disruptive, right, and eco-feminist and modern as you want to be, use any metaphor for God, any name for God, and here's a list of 15. Have at it, right? So yes, that's an easy place to start. I don't need the RPC to give me permission for that, right? But there may be some other places where we can experiment in a way that matches the Mark and the Ralph voice, right? That is disruptive enough to open our theological and spiritual doors, but not so disruptive that it throws us off our game in prayer. And that's a sweet spot that I would love to attain. I'm not quite sure how, but let's stay in conversation about it, y'all.
It's almost like the metaphor for Sinai, when people all over heard it, even people in different times, people different languages, and somehow it all got out.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Here.
Gotta go. Thank you so much, Fred. This was terrific. And thank you, everybody else. Good night.
Thank you.
Night,
Hey.
everyone. It was very worthwhile.
Thank
Sleep
you.
well.
Yay. Thank you all. And again, Barb. Mwah.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Hold on, I'm gonna turn the recording off. Later, y'all. Maybe. I'm having a trouble with my cursor today. I want to curse the cursor.
Yeah, that's why they call it the cursor.
Ain't that the truth? There we go.